Hey guys, we're going to do a quick little video over best hunting locations. We're first going to start off with topography change. And anytime that you find yourself in an area where you've got topography change, such as a timber into a agriculture field, or timber into a grass field or CRP or bedding area, that area right there, that transition area, really works out well. Now, once you get into those, if you can find a trail system or two trail systems, that are isolated right in there, and you can get in and out of there using your thermals as well as your wind in consideration for entry, exit, and during your hunt, that's going to be a great spot to set up and try to kill big mature deer. And even before that, if you find those during scouting, don't hesitate to set you a trail camera up there. I highly recommend using a black flash if you've got that available to you. Cellular is even better, but as much as non-intrusive as you can be, the better off hunting wise you're gonna be. So the second location I'm going to be isolating is going to be any kind of agriculture field, and I'm going to go ahead and throw food plots in here. And we'll first start off with the small food plots, such as our staging plots that lead into the big agriculture fields. And basically what those do is those allow those deer coming out of the bedding in the evening times back in the staging food plot, and then they'll mill around there, feed. We use a lot of the Nixa hardware. Buck salad products is one, but those deer feed in there in those brassicas, and then they'll transition out there later in the evening back into the big agriculture fields. And that allows you to have an isolated area where you're able to harvest those deer in a small little confined area, and allow those deer to push out in the evening. That way you can successfully get in and out of your tree stand or blind location without busting a whole lot of deer. Now, getting into the agriculture fields, we'll say we don't have a staging plot there. What I try to isolate there is, especially up there in Kansas, is I will try to find pinches or any kind of a funnel. So we've got a lot of areas where we've got some, say 80, 120 yards worth of timber, maybe 150 yards worth of timber, but there's a creek that runs through it, and then there's agriculture on the side. So the agriculture is sitting right up in here, and then you've got, say, a 30 to 40 yard area of timber, and then there's a creek, and then the rest of the timber continues. That 20 to 30 yards of timber, or 20, 40 yards of timber between that creek and that pond is what I like to call a funnel, or even a pinch point, where you're able to get in, whether you're using a canoe or waders, or you're able to just wade through that creek, use those ditch-like settings to get into that specific location, set you up a tree stand, or if you're going to use a climber or a saddle, whatever you've got, then now you've got those deer. Any deer that comes through there that's not going to go out into the agriculture field is going to be basically pinched or funneled right in there to you. And another great location, especially late season, is on those corners of those agriculture fields. If you've got a out of wind area, so let's say that we've got a northwest wind typically, or a north wind that comes in there with those big fronts, those deer will tend to hit that northeast corner of that agriculture field, so they're out of that wind. And whereas, if they were all the way down the south end, they're constantly going to get hit with that wind. So always keep that in mind in regards to, stand location. If you can find a pinch and in that northeast corner of that field, I think you're going to find a very good, basically all season stand location that should be extremely productive. Now, the very last one I want to talk about is swampy areas. I think that, when it comes to any kind of water holes, ponds, getting into the swamps, those are all great. There's different, first I'll just kind of talk about the water. I think that there's three primary periods that I would hunt water. First is going to be early season, when it's extremely hot, that first September 15th, all the way into the first week in October. Sometimes you get some 80, 90 degree days in there. Those deer are going to want a drink, so keep that in mind. The second time period is going to be during the rut. Both those does, but more importantly, those bucks, they are constantly moving throughout that woods or those agriculture fields. They need water. If you don't have a pond, set you up a water hole, I think it's going to really pay off for you, in the long run, to isolate those deer in one central location and be able to harvest them, when you feel fit. And then, once we get into this, and then the third one is going to be late season, and that's going to include your secondary and your third rut. If those does don't get bred when they first come into estrus in typically November, then another 30 some odd days or whatever it is, you can calculate that. Then those does will come back in the estrus. They don't get bred at that point. Then another time period comes by, and then they'll get come back in the estrus to get bred. So you could potentially have several rut stages. Typically your November one is going to be your primary one, but always keep in mind that secondary, third rut time period, and I think you'll be extremely successful. And then the very last topic I want to bring up is swampy areas. So if you've got, this can be any kind of conservation ground, or a lot of the duck habitat, I really feel like has been underutilized, especially say 10 years ago or even 5 years ago. But people are starting to really adapt, getting in there, and it is some tough hunting. So be prepared once you get into that swampy or any kind of wetlands area. But typically those are going to be some archery only areas, but there are some big mature deer that usually are in there. You just got to play your cards right, entry, exit. Again, if you're able to get in there with a canoe, boat, any kind of water source, wading, then especially be careful when you're doing that, and set you some cameras up if that's legal in your state or on your property, and figure out where those deer are coming in and out of. Maybe they're hidden some of that corn out there on some of that wetlands, transitioning back into bedding, some heavy topography change there from swamp to timber to maybe there's some grasslands. So isolate all those three, figure out that game plan where there's deer movement. I think you'll find yourself in a pretty extremely productive location. So hopefully this helps you guys out on finding out some best hunting locations. And like always, hopefully you guys are getting out there in nature, and best luck on your upcoming hunt.